YouTube, how the duck you doing? Duckfilms here. And if you're new to Deadlock and don't know what character to pick, maybe this video can be a little bit helpful to you. Now, I'm in no means the best player in the world, but I am ranked Eternus, so the higher echelon of ranks. And today, I'm going to be ranking some of the easiest to hardest characters to pick up when you're first starting out. A lot of these characters benefit players that are pretty decent at hero shooters or FPS games, so good at the shooting aspect, and less about the old macro and movement aspect of the game. Now, like I said, my tier list might be a little bit different than yours of what you think a character is strong or not, but for the easiest section, I make these characters, easy because their skills are rather transferable, being mouse one characters. If you come from games like Overwatch or Marvel Rivals, these characters are pretty self-explanatory and pretty straightforward. These are characters like your Haze. These are characters like your Infernus, because all you really do is hold mouse one for the majority of the time. Like your Wraith, you can also throw Graves into the mix. Again, pretty straightforward. And I would even throw Ven into that aspect as well, because he's relatively easy. All you do is hold mouse one for a majority of the time, believe it or not. A lot of these characters, now the thing about Rem is he's a lot more macro reliant, and it's not necessarily reliant on mouse one or just basic general skills. People would say he's super easy, but in my own opinion, supports in a game like Deadlock or supports or MOBAs are usually a lot harder because you have to deal with a lot more active items, and you're picking up the game for the very first time. You might not be the best at using active items, so I'm not going to put them on the easiest list. I would probably put them to hard or moderate because they rely on a lot more macro or different, types of aspects of what to do. Again, for your easiest, probably throw McGinnis into the mix as well. 7 is another really straightforward character. And that's probably some of the easiest characters you're looking at when you're coming and picking up this game for the very first time. These are some of the characters I would say to look at. Maybe less of Infernus because he's a little bit more reliant on other aspects of positioning and just knowing what to do. But still relatively easy because all you do is really hold down mouse one. That's why it's these characters. Now again, this isn't going to be a super detailed video about why these characters are placed where. Just a rough explanation of what I think. So if you're picking up the game for the first time, these are some of the characters you can be thinking about or looking at to be playing. So for moderate, these are characters that are a little bit easier than, I guess, the easiest characters. Pretty self-explanatory, but do require some level of knowledge on the game of where to position, how to use your movement abilities, things like that. So Mina, definitely moderate. She has more niche movement abilities, but she is easier than some of the other duelists in the game, than some of the other characters in the game. I'm 2 Marvel Rivals built at this point. Then we could put Vindicta, Great Talon. For the most part, a character like Dynamo is rather moderate, but still I see a lot of people all the way up in Eternus still misplay him or misuse him a lot, but that's kind of, I'll put a moderate. It's fine. You also have characters, I guess you could say Lash is moderate. Like, his skill 4 is relatively low, just getting a good understanding of some of the basic movement, but then the character evolves into more dynamic movement with different types of ways to move around the map, just knowing what to do in certain situations. It becomes a little bit harder. I don't know why I put Holiday there. It becomes a little bit harder to use in general. But for like an introduction character to like one of the movement characters, I guess is a pretty good way to think about it. I think another good basic character for the most part who's rather straightforward is Viper. Now I put Viper in the moderate section because they are a M1 character, but they have more to their kit than just M1 for the most part. So I think moderate is fine. I think Great Talon is also moderate in some aspect. That he's not necessarily an M1 character, although you could play him M1. It's more or less like just knowing how to hit your shots, knowing when to move around the map, knowing positioning. Those are the big things to think about with this character. Then moving on to, I guess, our semi-hard characters. That sounds really bad, but semi-hard characters. Abrams is moderate for the most part. Now, our semi-hard characters are probably characters, or it's going to be like a majority of the characters. So like our Bebop, he takes a little bit more skill because you have to land your hooks, you know how to play, you have to know how to get stacks, you know how to move around the map and gank and position well. I would say Billy is moderate because you have to understand the melee mechanic of this game, which can be a little bit difficult for newer players to pick up. So if you're picking up the game for the first time, you have to think about that. I think Calico is moderate. Hard. Doorman in some aspect is hard because you have to understand how to kidnap people, which sounds really bad, but it is a skill that does take a little bit of time to master or finesse with. You could put him moderate because he's easier to play, but he's still hard because you have to understand just what the character does as a whole and how to move. I would say Celeste is hard because of movement. The character makes movement a lot easier than some of the other characters in the game, but movement in general is something that's ever evolving, and it's a skill that is always needs refining and improving on. So I put her in the hard section. I'd also put Drifter in hard, I guess. Again, a lot of characters are going to be in the hard. Viscus as well. It's also difficult. I think Mo, probably easy. I don't know why I put him there. Apollo is like hard-ish. Maybe moderate. For the most part, pretty straightforward. Same thing with Ivy, pretty moderate. Kelvin, again, I think supports and MOBAs are one of the harder roles to play. Not necessarily from a mechanical standpoint, but from the standpoint of understanding macro and micro, and understanding how to use your active abilities all the time. People like to meme on support players in other games, like Overwatch, Marvel Rivals, for example. But I think generally speaking in MOBAs, they're a lot more complex because of all the active abilities you have to think about a lot more. So I always think that supports are harder to understand because there's a lot more to grasp. So I think Rem sits in that harder aspect, believe it or not. Yes, you can disagree, perfectly fine, but that is my own opinion. I also think that Paige is hard for the aspect that she's a lot more reliant on just abilities and using her abilities in macro and micro. She's probably one of the easier supports in the category, but definitely still relatively hard. But yeah. For hardest, though, I think, honestly, Holiday, Yamato, Pocket. You could also put Shiv down here as well, because I think these characters rely a lot on certain niche movement abilities and other aspects as well. I think Sinclair is on the hardest level as well, because they too take quite a lot. Warden is probably on a moderate. Geist is probably moderate as well, because they are an M1 character. Mirage is probably moderate. Paradox maybe a little bit harder because it's a more unique abilities, more niche abilities, and understanding fundamentally of the game, of where to position, where to TP, things like that aspect. Victor is probably moderate because all you do is farm and then you just run at people in most cases. And I would say Silver honestly is in between moderate and hard, because Silver has a lot of different movement techs and movement abilities, and again, it's another aspect. You have to land your shots consistently to be able to transform. But this is kind of what I'm thinking about this sort of tier list, is that there's a lot of characters that you might disagree or agree with, but the majority of the part is, if you're picking up the game for the very first time, You want to think about the easiest characters. You want to think about the characters that are transferable skills from other games. So like Overwatch and Marvel Rivals, like I stated at the beginning of the video. These are your M1 characters that you rely mostly on shooting, which are Haze, Furnace, Wraith, Graves, for example. All you do is really hold M1. You can argue that you have other aspects of the kit, but that's the premise of it. Venator, he's an M1 character, rather straightforward. He's a late game carry, so you're just gonna be farming the majority of the time and then doing a ton of damage. McGinnis, super straightforward character. Seven, super straightforward. Monocro, rather straightforward, believe it or not. But that's kind of what I think about this game. But like I said, you have your own opinion, which is perfectly fine, but you can let me know what you think in the comments down below. That's it for today's video. I hope you have a great and safe day, and I'll catch you in the next one.